Hi everyone, I'm Giselle, and if you've talked to me lately, it's very likely that I've talked to you about Power Automate, a wonderful tool in the Microsoft Power Platform suite that allows end users to take control of their own productivity. While that can sound a little bit scary and intimidating, I promise you that it's a lot easier than you think. Today, I'm actually going to walk you through one of the very first Power Automate flows that I built over a year ago and show you just how simple it can be. I've been in sales pretty much my entire life, and one thing that I recognized in most of my sales positions is that it requires a lot more manual data entry than I like to do on a daily basis. Organizations that I was working with would say, make sure that you're documenting your contacts in our CRM system. Make sure that you're giving the contacts to the marketing team in order for them to be able to nurture them and help with the sales journey. But most of the time, I would email with the contacts and never actually take the step of doing the data entry to get that contact saved anywhere. And it also ended up being a bit of a challenge for me because if I was trying to reach out to who I've engaged with at that particular organization before, I didn't have really great documentation. With this Power Automate flow, I was able to solve for that problem and also build upon it to make it more and more complex over the course of the last year to a point where the data feeds live into a CRM system and I never have to touch it, which is my absolute favorite. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. We're going to start by logging into make.powerautomate.com. Once you're here, you're going to select Create in the navigation menu to the left. Since this is a flow where we're going to take emails that are coming into our inbox and store them in another location, so when it's something that we want to happen seamlessly on the back end, we're going to select Automated Cloud Flow. For a flow name, go ahead and be as creative as you'd like, but I'm going to put something today that's a descriptor of what this flow is going to do. And we're going to call this flow Save Email Addresses. As far as choosing your flow's trigger, we know that we want this to happen from our email inbox in Outlook 365. We can search for Outlook and it'll give us a list of all the triggers that are available to us. One of the things I love about this is that there's a lot of common language in the names of the triggers. So I can take a look at this and say, oh, when a new email arrives, that's exactly what I want to happen. We can select that trigger and select Create. This is going to take us to the actual build page, and if you see this, we'll see when a new email arrives in our inbox. Well, that's exactly what we want. So what do we want to happen there? What we want to happen is we want it to store that email address somewhere. So we need to create the location of where it's going to be stored. Recently, I've really started using SharePoint lists. So I'm going to show you today how to create one if you have not created a SharePoint list before. Within this little navigation dot grid that we have up here on the left hand corner, you can click the app launcher and go to your SharePoint environment. I personally have a SharePoint site called Giselle Projects, and I'm going to select New List. There's a bunch of different templates that you can use, but today I'm going to start with Blank List. We're going to call this Email Addresses, and we're going to click Create. So you'll come to this page, and looking at it, we have the concept of columns across the top that we can add to. But today, we're only going to need one column for email address. We can add to it later on as we get more complex. But this title column, we're going to go ahead and rename that email address. Now we have this particular SharePoint list that is available as kind of that bucket to store the email addresses that we're going to be putting in there. Back to creating our flow. Our next step, because we created a SharePoint list, our next step is going to be an action within SharePoint. So again, by clicking SharePoint as an application, we have a list of all the different actions that are available to us. And by scrolling down, we can say, oh, create an item. Well, that sounds like what we want to do. So we'll go ahead and click Create Item. It's going to ask you here what your site address is for your SharePoint site. Most of the time it'll auto-populate with any SharePoint sites that you're already a member of, and we see Giselle Projects right here. Then it's also going to ask for the list name. So if we do the drop down here, we'll say, oh, email addresses. That's the one that I just created, so I'm going to select that. After just a second, it'll say, oh, Well, title, that was the one that we renamed email address. So now we can click here and the dynamic content pops up on the right-hand side where we have all of the things that are available to us from the previous step. And what we see here is we see from. And that is the email address of who sent us the message. So we can go ahead and click that. And now what this is doing is anytime we receive an email in our inbox, we want to create an item in our SharePoint list. So I'm going to save this right now. You need at least one trigger and one action in order to save. And now it says that my flow is ready to go and they're recommending that I test it. I am going to send myself an email from my phone, my trusty iPhone right now, so we can see if this sticks. Okay, the email has just arrived in my inbox, and now let's pop over to our SharePoint list, and we see Giselle at GiselleAiken.com has now popped up in our email address list. Now, anytime I receive an email in my inbox, it's going to save that email address over here to the SharePoint list. This is going to be really helpful in tracking all of our contacts and making sure that we're not missing anybody from any sort of our engagements. Some of the enhancements that you can actually do based on this as well is if we look at things like the trigger of when a new email arrives, there's advanced options, and we can actually specify things like if it is from a certain domain, save this. So if there are customers or partners that you're responsible for, you can identify that you only want to save email addresses that match those particular domains. It makes it really nice for us to really narrow down the scope of what email addresses we actually want to save. Hopefully you were able to follow along and can see the value in something like this. As I mentioned, this is one of the very first Power Automate flows that I ever personally built, and I've expanded significantly on this over the course of many months. The nice thing about Power Automate is that it is very much a Lego block type building environment. So you can add upon it, make modifications, make it more complex over time. And if you're a fellow salesperson, go ahead and shoot over some ideas of other parts of your job that are taking more time than they should. And let's take a look and see if there are things that we can automate using these tools. I love to collaborate with everyone and look forward to hearing from all of you in your automation journey.